Can you imagine that in the center of a sacred place, where everything should be pure and devout, dark forces are acting surreptitiously, disguised as familiarity, with the intention of dismantling what is most valuable to faith? No, we are not talking about fiction or a fantasy story. The reality is much more shocking and disturbing. The battlefield is not visible to the naked eye, but its effects can be devastating. Now, imagine that this weapon being used is not something obvious, like a physical war, but something much more subtle, something that reaches the soul and heart. Music. What should be an instrument to elevate the faithful to God, unite people in praise and exaltation, may be being used as a tool of spiritual manipulation, spreading chaos and division among those who should be united in faith. Shocking, isn't it? But what if I told you that Satanists are infiltrating churches, using music to create a spiritual rupture, weaken ministries, and corrupt priestly families? Yes, it's a disturbing topic, and this revelation gained even more force when a renowned pastor decided to expose this frightening truth in public. What you are about to discover may profoundly shake your understanding of the spiritual battle that rages behind the scenes of the Christian faith. This invisible spiritual war is being fought on a much deeper level than imagined, and the weapons used are not just physical forces or direct confrontations, but the very essence of worship, music. Imagine that what you hear during services may be corrupted, mixed with diabolical intentions, manipulating what should be a link between you and the divine. Now stop and reflect. How could this impact your faith and the community of believers around you? The battle is real, and it's closer than you think. Reports about infiltration of churches by people with evil intentions have been circulating for decades, and although it seems distant or fanciful to some, many believe that this is a palpable reality. Churches, seen as places of protection and spiritual refuge, have also become targets of dark forces that wish to corrupt the sacred environment. These infiltrations, according to several reports, do not happen randomly. They are part of a well-orchestrated strategy that aims to undermine the spiritual foundations of churches, especially attacking areas that are pillars of faith, such as the ministry of praise. What once seemed like an isolated and imperceptible attack to many religious leaders is now beginning to be revealed as a macabre plan that aims to destabilize spiritual harmony and weaken the community of believers. The worship ministry, one of the most vulnerable areas due to the emotional and spiritual nature of music, has become a crucial point of attack. This is because music, with its enormous power to influence emotions and thoughts, has the ability to lead people to profound spiritual experiences. However, if corrupted, it can become a vehicle of destruction. Satanism, with its different branches and practices, found an opportunity in the musical environment of churches to distort this spiritual force into something harmful. It is like a betrayal within the gates, using the very language of worship to infect hearts and minds with hidden messages that divert the faithful from the right path. Music, which is so powerful in creating an atmosphere of worship, can be subverted to spread evil influences in almost imperceptible but devastating ways. For those involved in ministry, especially musicians, the danger is even greater. Many of these musicians, without realizing it, end up playing in both secular and sacred environments, opening spiritual gaps through which these evil influences can act. What should be a time of consecration and elevation often turns into an open door for negative spiritual forces. When musicians, who have the responsibility to lead worship, inadvertently become agents of desecration by mixing secular influences with what should be sacred, the church becomes a breeding ground for destructive forces. If you have ever wondered why so many scandals have emerged in the evangelical milieu in recent years, there are those who say that this is directly related to these infiltrations. A Latin American pastor, a widely known figure among evangelicals and also in the secular world, brought light to a topic that many prefer to ignore. In a recent podcast, the pastor made shocking revelations about the activities of Satanists within churches. According to her, these infiltrators aim to destroy the spiritual and family structure of churches, and one of the most effective ways they have found to do this is through music. This statement, although it may seem exaggerated to some, makes a lot of sense when we look at the devastating impact that music can have on the mind and heart. When the ministry of praise is compromised, the church loses one of its main pillars of worship, and this directly affects the spirituality of the congregation. During the podcast, she was asked about some of the controversies surrounding her name, but what she shared went far beyond personal controversies. She revealed a plan of destruction orchestrated by Satanists who, according to her, are infiltrated within evangelical churches, especially targeting the ministry of praise. Imagine, during a service, people who should be there to guide the faithful in worship can, in fact, be used to undermine the sanctity of the environment. These individuals are not just ordinary people with questionable intentions, but agents of a greater force, working to destroy the spiritual foundations of the church from the inside out. They use music to create divisions, destabilize ministries, and weaken the spiritual pillars of churches. Music, a powerful tool for spiritual connection, becomes a means of corrupting the hearts of the faithful, moving them away from their true faith. What makes this even more alarming is the claim that these individuals are acting in an organized manner, with a clear agenda of spiritual destruction, targeted especially at environments where the church begins to have a positive impact on its community. The pastor's words echo a clear warning. The enemy is within the walls, and he is using worship to spread discord and separation among believers. During her speech, the pastor explained that these attacks are not random. They follow a strategic logic where churches that make a difference in their communities become targets. When the church begins to grow spiritually and gain territory, spiritually speaking, these infiltrators are warned and begin to act to undermine that strength, she said. The objective of these Satanists, according to Sarah, is clear: to destroy priestly families and disrupt the church from within. Music, which often goes unnoticed as a spiritual battleground, is a prime target. What many leaders and believers don't realize is that music has a unique ability to transcend words and directly touch the human spirit. That's why it's such a powerful weapon, both for good and for evil. When corrupted, it can be used to undermine the spiritual integrity of a church, starting with its musicians and worship leaders. They know that by corrupting the ministry of praise, they can affect the entire church, as music is a reference, especially for young people, she said. And it's not just a matter of musical choice. It's about the spirit behind the music. The influence of music is so profound that, once corrupted, it can spread desecration throughout the congregation, leading the faithful into a vulnerable spiritual state susceptible to other negative influences. It is an attack that begins subtly but spreads quickly, affecting the faith and spirituality of the entire community. One of the pastor's most impactful accounts involve her own experiences with spiritual attacks. For years, the pastor has participated in sanctification and liberation congresses, and this has made her a target of constant spiritual attacks. In one of these episodes, she reported that a witch materialized inside her house during a period of intense prayers. Imagine being in the middle of your most sacred spiritual practices and suddenly finding yourself face to face with an evil entity that seeks to destroy your spiritual balance. She described how, during consecutive nights, evil figures and presences manifested themselves in her environment, making it clear that these attacks were directed against her because of the spiritual work she was carrying out. The spiritual pressure was so intense that the house, which was supposed to be a haven of peace and protection, became a spiritual battlefield. On another occasion, when staying at a hotel to minister at a church, the pastor forgot to consecrate the room before entering and went through a terrifying experience where the bed began to shake violently and dark figures appeared in the room. Only after praying and consecrating the space did the attack cease. These events, according to her, are clear proof that the spiritual battle is real and that Satanists are willing to do anything to destroy those who are on the path of truth. These evil manifestations are a reminder that even in the midst of our daily routines, the spiritual world is always present, and attacks can happen when we least expect it. On social media, the reaction to the podcast was intense. While many evangelicals agreed with Sarah's words, stating that they had heard about Satanists infiltrating churches, others expressed skepticism. Some questioned whether such a serious infiltration would really be possible without the Holy Spirit revealing it. Light and darkness don't mix. Some critics have said, suggesting that if this were happening, God would have already exposed these evil forces. But what if the spiritual battle was intensifying to such an extent that even the most experienced leaders were being blinded by the enemy's subtle attacks? However, many others have argued that the spiritual world is much more complex and that subtle attacks can easily go unnoticed by even the most experienced leaders. These comments highlight the importance of being aware of the spiritual traps that surround us. If Jesus himself was tempted by the devil in the desert, why wouldn't Satanists try to infiltrate churches? Commented one internet user. This view has been widely shared by those who believe that spiritual warfare is ongoing and that churches are always under attack. For many, these revelations are not a surprise, but rather a confirmation of something they have suspected for a long time. The pastor also highlighted the importance of understanding the depth of impact that music can have on the spiritual environment. Music and sexuality are two fundamental pillars of worship, whether God or the devil, she said. When someone plays secular music in the world and then tries to play on God's altar without due consecration, it's as if they were trying to mix the sacred with the profane. What many don't understand is that music is not neutral. Each note, each melody, carries with it a spirit, an intention, and when this music is not consecrated, it can open doors to evil influences. For the pastor, this lack of consecration of musicians has been one of the biggest spiritual gaps in churches. Lack of adequate spiritual preparation before walking down the aisle leaves musicians vulnerable to evil influences. The consecration of musicians should be a unanimous practice in all churches, but unfortunately, this is neglected in many places, he said. When musicians enter the altar without consecration, music, which should be a vehicle of praise to God, can become a means of desecration. This negligence, according to her, allows evil forces to enter the sacred environment and contaminate the entire congregation, starting with the musicians and spreading throughout the church. The impact of this can be felt throughout the community, from the loss of spiritual connection to the erosion of the faith of believers. Now, the question that remains is, what do you think about all this? Do you believe that Satanists may be infiltrating churches, using music as a tool of spiritual corruption? This is a controversial topic, but it deserves reflection and discussion. Leave your comment below and join this conversation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving more content like this, which goes behind the scenes of the spiritual world and reveals the impact of music on churches. And if you are interested in learning more about this spiritual battle, watch the recommended video here, which further explores the connections between music, faith, and the spiritual world. The more we discuss, the more we learn about the invisible forces at work around us.